Good morning, Cornerstone Baptist Church. Hope you had a great week. Hope you enjoyed the first week of June. Definitely did get warm out there quick this week. But I pray that as you went through Psalms this week, that you enjoyed the variety of Psalms that were offered. I think it was great to see different aspects of what a relationship with God looks like. And I hope that you're growing in that as we start out on this. A reminder just from last week as you're reading and as we're teaching and thinking about these things, keep that head to heart spectrum in mind as you read. If you're reading and you have a journal out or your computer out, maybe write that head, heart, on the top of each page and try to capture that. And remember again where you are on that spectrum. Am I a person that's more head knowledge, what I know about God? This is important. But if I am in that category, and I have a tendency to be where I'm at, I want to push myself in my relationship with God to connect to Him in a more emotional sort of way as well, while being tethered to the head. If you're more on the emotional side, make a note of that and be looking for parts of the Psalms or Psalms themselves that connect and anchor you to facts and truths about who God is and your relationship with Him. And I think that that's a great way for us to look at these Psalms, to enjoy these Psalms, but also to personally grow. And that's what we want. We want to learn more about God, absolutely, but we also want to use these as a way of saying, wow, when we complete this, I really grew in my relationship with God. I didn't connect with God in this way, and I'm excited to do that as we move forward. So today, we're going to look at Psalm 13. And Psalm 13 is a lament. And so a lament is a passionate expression of grief and sorrow. And if you've been watching the news lately, our country is kind of going through a bit of a lament, although it might not be the same way that we would personally do it. Lament is definitely a way that I would say biblically, as I look at our current situation in our country. This is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. And so I thought it was important for us to take some time to read through this psalm, connect to it, into what's going on in our country, but also to pull it back and to look at it a little bit in an individual way as well, to say, how do I express grief and sorrow to God? So let's keep in mind a couple points as we move into Psalm 13. So the Psalms were written within a community. And so what I mean by that is this is the hymn book of the people of Israel, the hymn book or the prayer book, however you want to look at it. But the point is all of these songs were songs that were sung together in different situations. And so what's interesting is to kind of think about lament, right? A passionate expression of grief or sorrow, and to think about the fact that this would have been something a community sang together, whether it was something going on in that community that caused the group as a whole to lament, or they would rally around somebody who had some kind of grief or sorrow or struggle and sing this together with them. And so I want you to kind of keep in mind, as we, not just this week, but as we move forward, as you read these, as we talk about them, think about that communal aspect. And again, I think that's something here in the West, the church in the West has missed this. And it's really important, and I think it's really powerful too. And so I'm actually, as I'm reading through this, thinking about what are some ways that we can incorporate this idea of Psalms and community into our regular church service when we start back up. Maybe even through the video. So keep that community aspect in mind as you read these, because it's powerful. And it's going to feel awkward and weird because we don't typically do these sort of things necessarily within community well. But again, the part of this study in the Psalms is that we're pushing and stretching ourselves to grow in our relationship with God. And the only way that we grow is if we're stretching ourselves. So there is part of this that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, and that's okay. We need to be okay with that. So let's jump into Psalm 13. I'm just going to go a couple verses at a time as we go. So Psalm 13, 1 through 2. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? And again, I think as you read that, it's not a difficult or hard jump to say, to look in our nation right now and to say, this is a moment of lament in our country. And again, pulling in that communal piece. Hopefully, it's touching our hearts and impacting us as well. But there's an aspect of this where, again, as I communicated, the Psalms were communal. They were something that happened in that community where they would choose to pray to God or sing to God these words. But there's also an aspect where when hurt was happening in that community, people would rally around and grieve with other people. And I think wherever we are on that spectrum, there's something that we can do. Even here in Adrian, Michigan, with the stuff that's going on. Obviously, we should look at it and say, that shouldn't have happened. That George Floyd should not have died for what happened there, and that we do want justice in our world when things are wrong, when things that happen are so wrong. We should want and expect justice. And so that's a little bit of this cry, is recognizing that our world is not right. Right? How long, O Lord? How long are things going to be wrong like this? How long, really, David's saying, how long are you going to allow, God of justice? How long are you going to allow injustice to happen? Remember, lament is a passionate expression of grief and sorrow. And so that seems like, wow, this is a tough thing to say to God. I don't know if I'd say it. It's here for us to look at and to recognize that David had a relationship with God unlike any other. So when we see injustice in our world, are we crying out to God for justice? Right? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And there's people in our nation, in our community, that do feel like they're forgotten. They feel like they're not considered for anything, right? And this is a very real prayer in our world and in our nation today. Are we praying this alongside of our African American brothers and sisters right now? Are we praying to God for justice and for rightness in our world? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? And so I think one of these things is it's really okay for us to pray these words, these exact words, for parts of our nation that are just hurt and destroyed right now. To pray this to God, to beg Him and to ask Him with tough words and tough prayers that He would bring justice into our world, into our nation right now. And then I think the other piece of it for us is to just step back and to say, what are we doing? How can we in Adrian, Michigan, be a part of making sure we're taking positive step forward? And I think for me, when I thought about that this week, I thought about, what am I teaching my kids in this moment? How am I just using the sorrow and the grief and the things that are happening in cities all over our nation to say, really at the heart of this is an issue of racism, is an issue of deep hurt that it isn't just in this moment. It has been a part of our world for quite some time, since the beginning. And so how am I teaching? How am I training? How am I discipling those around me to be in a better place because of the gospel, to be in a better place where they can, again, as parents, we want our kids to be in a better place than we are. And so how am I striving to make that happen? And to be a person that's not just praying and giving it to God, but I think also God would say, well, I created you, so what are you doing in this moment? But I think this prayer piece is really important. And I think, again, I'm just going to challenge you at some point today, take those first two verses and pray it over our nation. Pray it over the people that are destroyed in their soul, because that's where David's at right now as he's writing this. He's just destroyed. And so take that communal piece of this psalm and pray it over our nation and pray it over our African American brothers and sisters in this moment. Moving on, we need to recognize, again, as I said, these are big words. These are tough words that David's kind of almost in a sense calling God out a little bit to fix this problem of injustice. And I think that we need to recognize that when we have continual or long-lasting struggles, pain, and deep hurt, that God wants us to pray an honest prayer to Him. He doesn't want us to say, well, I can't say that to God. And that's, I feel like I had a long period of time where I functioned that way as a person that was praying. I'm not going to say this to God, but I think relationship is so important, and that God wants us to pray big things. He's a big God and He can handle Himself, right? But there's that element of emotion and rawness that I think He wants us to lift to Him. And so again, I see this as for me personally, a struggle. Like I'm more of in that head spectrum. And so I need to push myself to, when I experience pain and suffering and hurt, am I having a pointed conversation with God about my hurt? Am I saying, how long, oh Lord, is this going to go on? Are you going to forget about me and my pain and my suffering forever? This isn't fair. This isn't right. What are you going to do about it? I think there are moments, again, and again, when do we let down and say those things? Who do we say those things to? We say them to people who are close to us, people that we love, people that we have relationship. And so I think God is seeking real and honest relationship with us in that moment. And so I say all of that to say there should be an element of our prayers that are real, that are filled with emotion, and we communicate those things to God, regardless of our hang-ups about what's okay to say to God. I think this psalm and other psalms that we're going to see allow us to have, they give us permission to let it out to God. So I think that's really important for us to see. Next verse, verses 3 and 4, consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. Consider me and answer me. Look at my situation, God. Consider it and see if I'm not wrong about this. See if this situation isn't wrong. This isn't right according to your standards, God. Consider and answer me. And again, I think David's confident that God is going to answer in the way that he sees it. And notice he says, "O Lord, my God." There's a possession there, almost my God. He has that kind of relationship with him, and he's not afraid to use that to say, I think this is why you're going to step in. I think this is why you're going to answer, and you're going to see as you consider me, like you are my God. And this is not fair, and this is not right. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say I've prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. It's really clear a lot of times in these Psalms that David is standing on his relationship with God, and his enemies do not have a relationship with God. And so he's very clearly kind of using that to say, everybody knows I'm connected with you. Everybody knows that you are my God. And so if I fail in this moment, if I fall, if I sleep the sleep of death, if you don't put this light in my eyes, if you don't restore me, right? My enemies are going to say that they've prevailed over me. And in essence, saying they prevailed over you because I am shaken. And so David is not afraid to use his relationship with God and to really explain things that God already knows, right? But again, this is a relationship. And so God wants this real conversation to happen. And that's what David's doing. He's in this part, he's almost, he's not necessarily treating this conversation as a conversation with God. It's like he's having this conversation with a good friend or somebody in his army. And he's just kind of saying, like, if this doesn't happen, right, like this is what everybody's going to think. And so he's using a very human argument in his relationship with God, but that shows us the realness of this relationship. Verses 5 and 6, these are the last two verses. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. And so what I want to point out is this is the result. We have a tendency to think this was all written at one time. And I want you to think about that, but think about yourself even. I know when I'm angry or upset, like at the beginning of this psalm, like, how long, oh Lord, will you forget me? Are you going to hide your face from me? What's going on? I'm experiencing this pain and suffering, and it's unfair and it's unjust. And what are you going to do about it? Like when I'm in that kind of mode, it takes me more than a couple verses to come to where David closes this out. And I think most people would say the same thing. Again, as we talked about last week, think about this almost as a journal. I think David's writing these things, whether it's on paper or pen back at his kingdom, or if he's out in the wilderness and in a cave hiding from Saul or different enemies, he's writing it in his head. And so there's this journal aspect to it where I don't think he necessarily wrote verses 5 and 6 right after 1 through 4. I think sometimes it takes us as humans, minutes, hours, days, weeks to kind of come back to a right, the mental piece, the head piece, like we talked about. And so this is the first 4 verses are the emotion piece, right, that we've talked about. And 5 and 6 are really the head part. And so oftentimes those things don't mesh right away, right? And so I believe that this was sometime later, after experiencing this and feeling this, whether it was minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, David comes back to this and finishes it. Maybe when his head's a little bit clearer, maybe when the pain has subsided a little bit and isn't at the forefront of his mind. The result is verses 5 and 6, but I've trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. And so there's this moment where David remembers, and remember is a really important word. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, it's one of those things I think as a pastor I'm just going to keep mentioning because it's great, but it's this idea of remember. Remember is really important. When we're in the trenches, when we're in immense pain, when something doesn't make sense, when it's not right, we need to remember who God is, and we need to remember how he has been faithful. And again, we have scriptures to show us how God is continually steadfast in his love towards his people. We have our own stories and the stories of others where God has been faithful. And those are the things that we come back to and we hang on. We remember and we're reminded about God's work, right? And really his goal. Right? What's his goal in all of this? He's orchestrating these things. He's using these things sovereignly, right? And again, as we've mentioned before, it's that we look more like Jesus through them, that we bring glory and honor to him. And so when we pause, when we step away from the situation, right, when there's been minutes, hours, days, and we come back to it, we remember that God is doing a work in us, and that work will involve stretching. That work will involve painful moments. But the result of that is that in that and through that God is making us something new. He's making us look more like Jesus through that situation, right? So the good and the bad, he's going to use them both to accomplish his will. There's a quote that I think connects really well with this whole idea by Charles Spurgeon. It says, when you cannot trace his hand, you can always trust his heart. When you cannot trace his hand, you can always trust his heart. And that, of course, is a quote about God. We can't always see what God is doing. We can't always trace his hand, but we can always trust his heart. And we know that he's going to use the good and the bad to make us for our good. And that good is that we look more like Jesus through it. So again, be reminded in the moments where it's peaceful, in the moments when we're not experiencing these things, it's really important for us to continue to remember the goodness of God, the steadfast love of God for us. And that way, again, when the waves hit, the storm hits, and the pain hits, we've been reminding ourselves and building ourselves up so that We don't have to go months or years, but maybe minutes to say, this is how I feel, and I've shared that with God, but I remember this. And I think the more we can shore that up, the more that we can shorten the time between anger and pain and praying that to God and remembering God, I think that shows some spiritual maturity. That shows some growth of what God is doing in our lives. And so as we close, I just want to challenge you again, as I did at the beginning, recognize what's happening in your community, in our world, in our nation, right now. And I'm just going to challenge you again, take those first two verses and pray it over our nation. Pray it over our cities like Minneapolis and other places. Pray it over our African-American brothers and sisters and cry out for justice. Link arms with them in this prayer and ask for God to do a work. Ask for God to bring justice. Ask for God to even work in you, in this area of love and compassion towards people of color, to grow in that. Okay? Pray this over our country, our nation. And then keep in mind that, and that's going to help you keep in mind that communal piece, right? That this really, these Psalms were really sung or prayed in community. And I think that will help stretch us a little bit. And then, like I said, I think a key is when sometimes we don't have the words have already been written for us. So use these words directly back to God as you're reading through them. Wow, this Psalm really expresses where I'm at right now. I'm just going to pray it out loud to God. Feel free to do that as you come across those. Again, keep in mind your head and your emotions. Where are you at? This one, 4 verses really of extreme pain and suffering and questioning, and where's the justice, God? David was bold enough in his relationship with God to communicate those things. Where are you at in that moment? When you do feel that pain and that suffering. I know that as a church, we've had a lot of prayer requests, a lot of people suffering and hurting. It's okay for us to take this lament, this passionate expression of grief and sorrow, and take it to our God who can handle it. So maybe that's you. Maybe you need to be a little bit more connected to emotion and heart and lift that up to God in a passionate way. And I think you're going to see your relationship with God grow. Maybe you don't have a problem communicating emotionally and passionately to God. Maybe the issue is the remembering part at the end here, 5 and 6. Go through, take some time to think about what God has done for you. Where have you seen the steadfast love of the Lord, right? Where are you able to put your trust and your hope, right? Ultimately, we know, and as he said, my heart shall rejoice in your salvation. If we have a relationship with God, he's already taken care of a huge piece of that, right? The biggest piece, right? The most suffering we would ever have is to be eternally separated from him. And so the gospel of Jesus Christ changed that for me, changed that for you if you have a real relationship with him. And so again, wow, that's just amazing that he has taken care of the deepest hurt that we could possibly ever feel. And if he's taking care of that, what's he going to do with this that I'm experiencing here in the moment? And it's definitely a great way to end this psalm where he says, I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Like, it starts out with, this isn't right, God. How long are you going to hide from me and from this situation, and let me experience this pain. And then it ends with, I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. As we remember the steadfast love of God, as we remember the salvation that he has brought, the only response is for us to sing and to praise him because he has dealt bountifully with me. So again, where are you on that spectrum? Where do you need to take some steps today as you look at Psalm 13 with me? That's going to make you stronger in your relationship with God. Just as a reminder, next week we're moving on to the next section, which will be chapters 21 through 30. Take a couple each day, read them, jot some things down, think about that head and the heart spectrum, the head and the emotions, and have some fun reading this and developing your relationship with God. We're praying for you as you go through this Psalm journey with us. We love you very much, and we will continue to be lifting you up in prayer. Have a great week.